The six-legged beast moved with surprising stealth for its bulk. Abel had been tracking it since dawn, following broken twigs, disturbed undergrowth, and occasional blue fur caught on thorns. He needed this kill. Winter was approaching and his food stores wouldn't last without meat to smoke and preserve. Abel adjusted his grip on the heavy spear, its shaft worn smooth from years of use. The weight felt reassuring in his calloused hands. His long knife hung at his belt, ready if the beast charged and close combat became necessary. 15 years as a Federation soldier had taught him to always have a backup plan. 3 years alone on this godforsaken planet had taught him that backup plans often failed anyway. The forest thickened around him, massive tree trunks wider than he could wrap his arms around, reaching toward a violet sky. Strange bulbous fruits hung from twisted branches, most poisonous to humans. He'd learned that lesson the hard way during his first month here. Abel still bore the scars from the seizures and vomiting that had nearly killed him. He froze as a twig snapped ahead, but not where the beast should be. Something else was moving through the forest. Abel crouched lower, muscles tensed. 3 years of solitude had made him wary of any unexpected encounter. The planet had already tried to kill him in countless ways. He wouldn't give it another chance. The rustling grew louder, panicked and careless. Whatever approached wasn't hunting. It was fleeing. Abel shifted behind a massive trunk, spear ready. A flash of blue burst through the undergrowth, stumbling and gasping. Not the beast. A child. A Novan child. The blue-skinned girl couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 by human standards. Her face was scratched, dark purple blood crusted along her cheek. Wide, silver eyes darted frantically behind her until she spotted Abel. She froze, trembling at the sight of him. An alien creature with a weapon. Abel had encountered Novans before. The indigenous species looked remarkably humanoid, despite their blue skin and silver eyes. They were tribal, territorial, and generally best avoided. He'd learned their language well enough to trade occasionally at the edges of their settlements, but he kept those interactions brief. Trust was a luxury he'd abandoned long ago. The girl stared at Abel, terror plain on her face. Then something shifted in her expression. Desperation overcoming fear. "Please, human, help," she cried in broken Terran. "My mother is trapped." Abel remained motionless. Getting involved in Novan problems was exactly the kind of complication he'd avoided for 3 years. The shipwreck that had stranded him here had also freed him from humanity's endless wars and politics. He'd built a life of solitude by choice. Simple. Uncomplicated. "Please," the girl repeated, taking a tentative step forward. "The Sky Hunter will kill her." Abel noticed she wore crude leather garments, unlike the woven fabrics typically favored by Novan settlements. Her feet were bare and calloused, suggesting she spent more time in the wilderness than most Novan children. "Where?" The word came out rough from disuse. Abel rarely spoke aloud anymore, even to himself. Relief flooded the girl's face. "This way. Not far." She turned and darted back the way she'd come, clearly expecting Abel to follow. Abel hesitated. The six-legged beast would be gone by now, startled by the commotion. That meant no meat for his stores, no security against the coming winter. He should turn back, return to his cabin, and start hunting again tomorrow. Instead, he followed the girl. She moved quickly despite her small size, navigating the tangled undergrowth with the ease of someone born to this environment. Abel kept pace, alert for threats. His spear remained ready. Not all predators on this planet hunted alone. "What's your name?" he asked as they ran. "Alara," she answered without slowing. "Mother calls me Ella." "What happened, Ella?" "Sky Hunter. Big one. Mother pushed me from nest when it attacked. I fell into bushes. She fought it, but..." The girl's voice caught. "It took her to its nest. She's still alive. I heard her calling." Abel knew of the Sky Hunters, massive flying predators with leathery wings spanning 20 feet or more. They resembled the ancient pterodactyls from Earth's fossil record, but with 6 eyes and razor-sharp teeth lining elongated jaws. They typically hunted the tree-dwelling herbivores that populated the forest canopy, but wouldn't hesitate to snatch a Novan or a human if the opportunity arose. "There," Allura pointed upward, slowing her pace. Abel looked up and felt his stomach tighten. A colossal tree rose before them, dwarfing even the giants around it. Near its crown, perhaps 200 feet up, a massive nest of tangled branches and debris clung to the trunk. This was no ordinary sky hunter. Only the largest, oldest hunters built nests this substantial. A distant cry echoed from above, weak but distinctly Novan. "She's alive!" Alara's face lit with desperate hope. "Please, human, please help her." Abel assessed the tree with a soldier's calculating eye. The trunk was rough-barked with enough handholds for climbing, but the journey upward would be perilous and slow. By the time he reached the nest, the sky hunter might return. If it did, "Wait here," he instructed Alara, unshouldering his pack and setting it at the base of the tree. He kept only his spear and knife. "If I'm not back by nightfall, head east until you reach the river. Follow it downstream. You'll find other Novans eventually." Alara nodded solemnly, but fear shimmered in her silver eyes. Abel began his ascent, finding purchase in the tree's gnarled bark. The climb was grueling. Sweat soon soaked his tunic, and his muscles burned with the effort. Several times, handholds crumbled beneath his fingers, nearly sending him plummeting to the forest floor below. Once his foot slipped and he hung by one arm, heart pounding as he scrambled to regain his footing. A fall from this height would mean certain death. Halfway up, a piercing screech split the air. Abel pressed himself against the trunk, becoming as still as possible. The sky hunter returned, its massive form circling the forest canopy. From this distance, Abel could see the creature clearly, a nightmare of leathery wings and glistening teeth. Its 6 eyes scanned the forest floor, likely searching for Alara. When it didn't spot the girl, the predator banked toward its nest. Abel remained motionless, barely breathing as the creature settled into its nest with a carcass, something with blue fur that resembled a small deer. Not the Novan woman, then. The hunter had been hunting elsewhere. Abel waited until the beast began tearing into its meal before continuing his climb. The sounds of ripping flesh and crunching bones masked the noise of his ascent. Finally, he reached a position just below the nest. He could hear movement inside, both the wet sounds of the hunter feeding and something else. Labored breathing punctuated by small, pain sounds. Abel adjusted his grip on his spear, preparing himself. He would have one chance, one strike. If he missed or merely wounded the creature, he would die in this nest, and the Novan woman would follow soon after. He took a deep breath, steeled himself, and lunged upward into the nest. The sky hunter sensed him immediately, whipping its long head toward the intrusion. 6 eyes fixed on Abel with predatory focus. Its wings unfurled partially in the confined space, and its blood-slicked jaws opened in a screech of rage. Abel didn't hesitate. He drove his spear forward with all his strength, aiming for the juncture where the creature's long neck met its body. The spearhead punctured the leathery hide, sinking deep into flesh. Hot, greenish blood spurted from the wound, splattering Abel's face and arms. The sky hunter shrieked in pain and fury. Its head darted forward with blinding speed, jaws snapping inches from Abel's face. He twisted aside, maintaining his grip on the embedded spear, driving it deeper. The creature thrashed, powerful wings beating against the nest, threatening to dislodge Abel and send him plummeting. He wrapped one arm around a branch for stability and drew his knife with his free hand. The sky hunter lunged again. This time, Abel was ready. He slashed upward, opening a gash across 2 of the creature's eyes. It reeled back, screeching in agony. Abel seized the moment. He abandoned his spear, leapt forward, and drove his knife into the wound he'd already created. He twisted the blade, feeling it sever something vital. The sky hunter convulsed, its massive body shuddering. A final gurgling screech escaped its jaws before it collapsed, wings twitching in death spasms. Panting, covered in greenish gore, Abel turned his attention to the rest of the nest. Bones and rotting carcasses littered the tangled branches, creating a nauseating stench. Movement caught his eye, a blue form half buried under debris at the far side of the nest. The Novan woman lay partially pinned beneath branches in the remains of previous meals. Her silver eyes, identical to her daughter's, were wide with fear and disbelief as she stared at Abel. Purple blood seeped from wounds on her arms and torso, but none appeared immediately life-threatening. "I'm here to help," Abel said in the Novan tongue, sheathing his knife to appear less threatening. Your daughter, Ilara, sent me. Ayla is alive? The woman's voice was weak but hopeful. Yes, she's waiting below. Relief flooded the woman's face, followed quickly by wariness. Why would a human help us? Abel didn't answer as he carefully removed the debris pinning her down. The question struck too close to what he'd been asking himself since he'd decided to follow the girl. Why had he helped? 3 years of isolation had taught him self-reliance and detachment. Yet here he was, risking his life for strangers. Once freed, the woman tried to stand but crumpled with a gasp of pain. My leg, she explained, gesturing to her right ankle, swollen and discolored. Abel examined it with gentle hands. Broken, but clean. I can splint it, but you can't climb down. I'll have to carry you. She hesitated, then nodded. I am Lyra. Abel. He fashioned a crude splint from branches and strips torn from his tunic. As he worked, Lyra studied him with cautious curiosity. You have gentle hands for a warrior, she observed softly. Abel glanced up, surprised by the comment. It had been years since anyone had noted anything gentle about him. I was a field medic before becoming a soldier. Old habits remain. A healer who became a fighter, Lyra mused. Among my people, it is usually the opposite path. Something in her voice, a lack of judgment, perhaps, made Abel offer more than he'd intended. War changes priorities. Survival becomes more important than healing. Yet here you are, healing a stranger. Her silver eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. Perhaps some things cannot be changed, even by war. The descent proved far more challenging than the climb. Abel secured Lyra to his back with vines stripped from the nest, but her weight made finding secure handholds difficult. Several times they nearly fell. During one heart-stopping moment, an entire section of bark broke away beneath Abel's foot. They swung precariously, suspended only by his grip on a knot in the trunk. Lyra's arms tightened around his neck, her breath warm against his ear as she whispered something in her native language. A prayer, perhaps. Hold tight, Abel grunted, finding a new foothold. I won't let you fall. I know, came her quiet reply, her trust unexpected and strangely warming. By the time they reached the ground, the forest had darkened with approaching dusk. Ilara rushed forward with a cry of joy when she saw her mother. The reunion brought an unexpected tightness to Abel's chest, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. You saved her! Ilara's silver eyes shone with tears and gratitude. Thank you, human. Abel, he corrected automatically. My name is Abel. They couldn't travel far with Lyra injured, so Abel constructed a simple shelter from branches and broad leaves. As darkness fell, he built a small fire, careful to use dry wood that produced minimal smoke. Sky hunters weren't the only predators in these forests, and fire would keep most at bay. While Ilara tended to her mother, Abel cleaned his spear and knife of the hunter's caustic blood. His thoughts turned to his abandoned hunt and dwindling supplies. The winter would be harder now, but as he glanced at the Novan pair huddled together by the fire, he found he couldn't regret his decision. After eating dried meat from Abel's pack, Ilara fell asleep curled against her mother's side. Lyra remained awake, watching Abel across the fire. When she caught him looking at her, she didn't avert her gaze as most would. There was a directness to her that reminded him of the best commanders he'd served under, those who could assess a situation clearly, without self-deception. Why were you in these forests? Abel asked quietly. Novan settlements don't usually range this far west. Lyra's expression darkened. We fled our settlement. There is unrest among our people. Some clans have begun trading with the human outpost to the north. Abel knew of it, a rough mining operation established by survivors from another crashed ship. He avoided them as carefully as he avoided the Novan settlements. They trade resources, Lyra continued, but also living merchandise. My husband died resisting when they came for Ilara. I managed to escape with her, but she looked down at her splinted leg. We have nowhere to go now. Abel absorbed this information silently. Human exploitation was hardly surprising. It was one reason he'd chosen isolation. Humanity brought its worst traits to every world it touched. You can stay with me until your leg heals, he found himself saying. My cabin is a day's journey northeast. It's small, but defensible. Surprise flickered across Lyra's features. You would shelter strangers? Abel wasn't sure how to answer. 3 years of solitude had numbed something within him, buried emotions he'd thought long dead. Yet Alara's plea for help had awakened something he'd forgotten existed. Compassion, perhaps, or maybe just humanity. "Get some rest," he said instead of answering. "We have a difficult journey tomorrow." The night brought new dangers. Abel sat awake, keeping watch as Lyra and Alara slept. Shortly after midnight, he detected movement in the underbrush surrounding their small camp. His hand tightened on his spear as glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness. A pack of nocturnal predators that locals called shadow stalkers. Wolf-like creatures with 8 legs and excellent night vision. They typically hunted in groups, surrounding their prey before attacking. Abel counted 6 pairs of eyes circling the camp. The fire would hold them at bay temporarily, but the flames were dying down, and he had limited wood to restore it. He needed to act before the pack grew bolder. With deliberate movements, Abel added the last of their wood to the fire, creating a momentary surge of flames. In that brief illumination, he identified the largest shadow stalker, the pack leader. Without hesitation, he hurled his spear with deadly accuracy, catching the creature through its throat. It collapsed with a gurgling howl. The rest of the pack scattered momentarily, confused by the sudden attack. Abel seized the opportunity, charging the nearest shadow stalker with his knife drawn. The creature leapt to meet him, but Abel had anticipated this. He dropped to one knee, allowing the beast to sail over him while slashing upward, opening its belly. Hot blood splashed his arms as the creature crashed behind him, writhing in death throes. The remaining stalkers retreated, unwilling to risk further losses. Abel retrieved his spear from the pack leader's corpse and dragged both killed creatures back to camp. The meat would be stringy and gamey, but nutritious, and more importantly, it would replenish some of his winter stores. Lyra had awakened during the confrontation and watched with wide eyes as Abel returned. "You fight like someone who has faced death many times," she observed. "I have," Abel replied simply, beginning to skin the first creature. "Yet you risk your life for strangers." Abel paused, knife in hand. "Maybe I'm tired of only fighting for myself." Lyra watched him work for a moment. "In our culture, a provider who defends his clan is the highest calling. Many speak of this honor, but few truly embody it." She paused, then added softly, "You would have been respected among my people, Abel." Their eyes met across the fire, and for a brief moment, Abel felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a connection that went beyond mere survival necessity. He looked away first, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. Morning brought clear skies and the chittering calls of arboreal creatures awakening in the canopy. Abel fashioned a crude crutch for Lyra and a travois to drag her when the terrain became too difficult. Their progress was slow but steady. Alara remained close to her mother initially, but as the day wore on, curiosity drew her to Abel's side. She peppered him with questions about Earth, about humans, about his life before the crash. Abel answered minimally at first, unaccustomed to conversation, but gradually found himself elaborating as the girl's enthusiasm proved infectious. "Were you a warrior?" she asked, eyeing his spear with fascination. "A soldier," he corrected. "Not the same thing." "What's the difference?" Abel considered this. Warriors fight for glory or honor. Soldiers fight because they're ordered to. "Which is better?" "Neither," Abel replied honestly. "Fighting only makes sense when you're protecting something that matters." Alara digested this. "Like how you protected us from the Sky Hunter?" The question caught Abel off guard. "Yes," he admitted after a moment. "Like that." From a few paces behind them, Lyra watched this exchange with a small smile. When Abel glanced back and caught her expression, she didn't hide it. Instead, she held his gaze with a warmth that made him momentarily forget the harsh wilderness surrounding them. Their journey was interrupted midday when the ground beneath them trembled. At first, Abel thought it was an earthquake, not uncommon on this tectonically active planet, but the rhythmic nature of the vibrations suggested something else. "Get down," he commanded, pulling Alara behind a fallen tree. Lyra followed, wincing as she dragged her injured leg. Over the ridge ahead came a massive creature that locals called a thunderfoot. Similar to Earth's ancient Brontosaurus, but with armored skin and 6 tree-trunk legs, the beast stood nearly 80 feet tall. Usually peaceful herbivores, thunderfoots became devastating forces of destruction when frightened or territorial. This one had a baby at its side, which made it exponentially more dangerous. "Don't move," Abel whispered as the massive creatures approached their hiding spot. They have poor eyesight but can sense vibrations. They remained motionless as the thunderfoots passed within yards of their position. The ground shook violently with each step, and tree bent as the creatures pushed through the forest. Alara's eyes were wide with fear and wonder, but she remained perfectly still, her small hand clutching Abel's arm. Abel instinctively stretched his other arm around Lyra's shoulders, pulling her closer to shield her from potential falling debris. She leaned into him without hesitation, her warmth against his side oddly comforting. When the danger passed, neither of them immediately moved apart. "Thank you," Lyra murmured. "For what?" "For protecting us. For being the kind of man who shields others with his own body without thought." Their faces were close, too close for Abel's comfort, yet not close enough. He pulled away awkwardly, unused to such proximity. "We should keep moving." After the thunderfoots passed, they continued their journey with greater caution. By late afternoon, rain began to fall, not the gentle showers of earth, but stinging droplets that carried a slight acidic burn. Abel hastily constructed a canopy from large leaves to protect them, particularly Lyra, whose open wounds would be aggravated by the caustic precipitation. As they huddled beneath the makeshift shelter, Alara curled up between them and fell asleep, exhausted from the day's journey. Abel found himself watching Lyra as she gently stroked her daughter's hair. There was a grace to her movements, a quiet strength that he found increasingly difficult to ignore. "She trusts you," Lyra said softly, noticing his gaze. "Children sense things adults often miss." "What do you mean?" "They see the truth of a person beneath the surface." Lyra's silver eyes studied him with unsettling perception. "You built walls around yourself, Abel, but they're not as solid as you believe." He looked away. "Walls keep you alive in hostile territory. They also keep you alone." Her voice held no judgment, only observation. "Is that truly survival?" The question lingered between them, unanswered but not forgotten. They reached Abel's cabin as dusk approached. It was a simple structure, built against a cliff face with stone walls and a wooden roof. A small stream ran nearby, providing fresh water. Abel had constructed it for functionality rather than comfort, but seeing it through his companion's eyes, he recognized its starkness. "It's not much," he said as he helped Lyra inside. "It is sanctuary," she replied simply. "That is everything." The cabin had only one bed, a platform covered with furs from animals Abel had hunted. He gave this to Lyra and Alara, fashioning a sleeping mat for himself from spare furs. That night, as he lay listening to the soft breathing of his unexpected guests, Abel realized it was the first time in 3 years he hadn't slept alone. The days stretched into weeks and weeks into months. Winter arrived, bringing howling winds and ice that coated the trees in crystalline sheaths. Inside the cabin, however, warmth prevailed. Abel's solitary routine expanded to include his companions. He taught Alara to set traps for small game and identify edible plants. Lyra, though limited by her healing leg, contributed by fashioning new clothing from animal hides and weaving baskets from flexible branches. Each evening they gathered around the fire, sharing stories of their respective worlds. Abel found himself speaking more than he had in years, describing Earth's oceans, mountains, and forests to an enthralled Alara. Lyra listened too, her questions more perceptive, drawing out details Abel hadn't known he remembered. The scent of rain on hot pavement, the taste of fresh fruit, the sound of music floating from open windows on summer evenings. In turn, Lyra taught Abel about Novan culture, their seasonal celebrations, their reverence for natural cycles, their belief that all life existed in delicate balance. When she spoke, her usually pragmatic demeanor softened, her hands gesturing gracefully to illustrate concepts without Terran equivalents. One evening, as Alara slept, Lyra hummed a haunting melody while working on a new basket. Abel watched her fingers deftly weaving patterns that seemed both decorative and symbolic. "What does the pattern mean?" he asked. Lyra glanced up, surprised by his interest. "It's a protection weave. Each intersection represents connections between family members." She hesitated, then added, "I've included 3 strands." The significance wasn't lost on Abel. Three strands, herself, Alara, and him. The notion of being included in their family circle created a strange tightness in his chest. You have knowledge of plants we do not, Lyra observed as Abel prepared a poultice for a rash Alara had developed. Our healers would value such wisdom. Abel shrugged. Trial and error. Some lessons were painful. Yet you survived. There was admiration in her expression. My people say humans are weak without their technology, but you have proven otherwise. Humans adapt, Abel replied. It's our one useful trait. Is that all you see in yourself? Mere adaptation? Lyra set aside her weaving and moved closer, her silver eyes intent on his face. I see more. What do you see? The question escaped before Abel could stop himself. Lyra reached out, her blue fingers lightly tracing a scar on his forearm. I see someone who has endured pain without becoming cruel. Someone who protects without seeking reward. Her touch lingered, warm against his skin. Someone who fights belonging even as he creates it. Abel remained still, acutely aware of her proximity, of the gentle pressure of her fingers on his arm. You see what you want to see. Perhaps, or perhaps I see what you have forgotten. She withdrew her hand, but the warmth of her touch remained. Good night, Abel. As winter deepened, food became scarcer. Abel ventured further afield in his hunting, sometimes staying away for days at a time. Each return brought an unexpected moment of joy when he crested the final ridge and saw smoke rising from the cabin chimney. And each time he entered, Lyra would look up from whatever task occupied her, relief and something more complex washing over her features. On one such expedition, he returned to find the cabin door barricaded from within. Lyra, he called, concerned. Alara! The door cracked open and Alara's frightened face appeared. Relief washed over her features when she saw Abel. They came looking for us, she whispered as she unbarred the door. Inside, Lyra sat by the fire, a crude spear clutched in her hands. Her face was taut with tension. 3 warriors from our former clan, she explained. They tracked us here. Did they see you? Abel asked, surveying the cabin for any sign of disturbance. No, we hid when we heard them approaching. They circled the cabin but did not enter. Abel's jaw tightened. They'll return with others. We have put you in danger, Lyra said, her voice heavy with regret. We should leave. No, and the force of Abel's response surprised even him. This is your home now, too. We'll defend it together. Lyra's eyes widened slightly at his vehemence. She set aside her spear and approached him, stopping close enough that he could see the flecks of darker blue in her silver irises. You would fight for us? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. She studied him for a long moment, then reached up to touch his face, her blue fingers cool against his cheek. Then we are truly home. The simple statement and gentle touch broke something inside Abel, a final barrier he'd maintained even as others had fallen. He caught her hand, holding it against his face. I never expected to find anything worth fighting for again, he admitted quietly. Yet here we are. Lyra's lips curved in a small smile. Perhaps the universe has plans we cannot foresee. The days that followed were tense with anticipation. Abel reinforced the cabin's defenses, setting traps in the surrounding forest and fashioning additional weapons. He taught Lyra and Alara basic combat techniques, though he hoped they wouldn't need them. Despite the looming threat, these days held a strange contentment. Working together to protect their home created a deeper bond between them. Abel found himself watching Lyra when she wasn't looking. The grace of her movements, the determination in her silver eyes, the way she hummed softly to herself when concentrating. Why do they want us back so badly? Alara asked one night as Abel sharpened his knife by the fire. Power, Lyra answered before Abel could. Control. Those who trade with the human outpost gain wealth and weapons. Those who resist become examples. Or commodities, Abel added grimly. Alara's silver eyes widened with understanding beyond her years. Would they sell us to the bad humans? Yes, Lyra said softly. That is why we must never be captured. Abel met Lyra's gaze across the fire and saw the same resolve that had driven him through years of warfare. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They would die before allowing Alara to face such a fate. That night, after Alara had fallen asleep, Lyra joined Abel outside where he stood watch under the stars. They had begun taking turns at sentry duty, but often found themselves sharing the quiet hours of darkness together. The stars looked different here than on my homeworld, Abel observed as Lyra settled beside him on the rough-hewn bench he'd built beside the cabin door. Do you miss it? Earth? Abel considered the question. I miss what it was, or what I imagined it could be, not what it became. And what did it become? A battlefield. Abel's voice hardened. Humanity never learned to live with difference, only to exploit it or destroy it. Lyra was quiet for a moment. Yet you, a human, have shown more respect for difference than many of my own kind. Maybe I'm not a very good example of humanity. Or maybe you're the best of it. Lyra's hand found his in the darkness, her blue fingers twining with his pale ones. The part worth preserving. The gesture was simple but profound, a bridge between worlds. Abel found himself holding her hand tightly, a lifeline in the vast isolation of this alien planet. I hated humans when we first fled, Lyra admitted softly. I blamed all of you for my husband's death, for our exile. Meeting you changed that. You showed me that cruelty and kindness exist in all species. Your husband, Abel began hesitantly. Do you miss him? Lyra gazed up at the unfamiliar constellations. I honor his memory and his sacrifice. He was a good man, chosen for me by our clan elders when we were both very young. She paused, but there was never the connection that... She stopped, seemingly unsure how to continue. That what? Abel prompted gently. Her silver eyes met his. That I feel when I'm with you. The Novan warriors returned a week later, 8 strong. Abel detected their approach long before they reached the cabin, thanks to the warning systems he'd established. He positioned Lyra and Alara in a hidden space beneath the cabin floor, accessible through a trapdoor disguised by furs. Stay silent, no matter what happens, he instructed, handing Lyra his long knife. If I fall, take the eastern path to the river caves. You can survive there until spring. Abel, Lyra began, then seemed at a loss for words. Instead, she reached up and touched his face with gentle blue fingers. The gesture conveyed what words could not. Then, with sudden resolve, she pulled him closer and pressed her lips to his. A kiss that crossed the boundaries between their species and spoke of emotions too complex for language. When they parted, Abel rested his forehead against hers for a brief moment. I'll come back, he promised. Alara threw her arms around his waist. Come back, she whispered fiercely. Abel hugged her briefly, then sealed them beneath the floor. He positioned himself outside the cabin, concealed among the trees. His strategy was simple. Thin their numbers before they reached the structure, then draw the survivors away from Lyra and Alara's hiding place. The first warrior fell to a snare trap, hoisted upside down with a startled cry. Before the others could react, Abel's spear found its mark in another's chest. He melted back into the forest as the remaining 6 warriors fanned out, now alert to the danger. Show yourself, human, called their leader, a tall Novan with facial scarring that marked him as a veteran fighter. We want only what belongs to our clan. Abel circled silently, using the forest he knew intimately to his advantage. Another warrior triggered a pit trap, falling with a scream onto sharpened stakes below. 5 remained. The next hour became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Abel struck from the shadows, wounding 2 more warriors before they cornered him near the stream. He fought with cold efficiency, his spear a blur of motion. 1 warrior fell, throat opened by the spearhead. Another lost an eye to a precise thrust before retreating. 3 warriors remained, including the leader. They coordinated their attacks now, forcing Abel to defend from multiple angles. A blade sliced his arm, then another cut across his back. Pain flared, but Abel pushed it aside, focusing only on survival. The scarred leader lunged forward, faster than Abel anticipated. His blade pierced Abel's side, sinking deep between his ribs. White-hot agony exploded through his body. Abel staggered, nearly dropping his spear. The Novan yanked his weapon free, preparing for a killing blow. In that moment, something shifted in Abel, not fear of death. He'd made peace with that long ago, rather fear for what his death would mean for Lyra and Alara. They had become something he never expected to find on this planet. family. With a roar that startled even the battle-hardened warriors, Abel surged forward. He drove his spear through the leader's throat with such force that the shaft snapped when the Novan fell. The remaining warriors hesitated, then fled into the forest, abandoning their mission in the face of such ferocity. Abel stumbled back to the cabin, blood soaking his tunic. His vision blurred as he fumbled with the trap door. Lyra's gasp told him how bad he looked. "Bull!" Alara cried as they emerged from hiding. "It's done," he managed before collapsing. He drifted in and out of consciousness as Lyra treated his wounds. Her gentle hands cleaned and stitched the gashes, applying poultices of herbs he'd gathered throughout the winter. Alara never left his side, her small hand clutching his, her silver eyes wide with fear. "Don't leave us," she pleaded when his fever peaked on the third night. "Please, Abel, don't leave." Through the haze of pain and delirium, Abel heard her words not as a child's plea but as a lifeline, something to anchor him to the world of the living when it would have been easier to let go. "I won't," he promised, though his voice was barely a whisper. "I won't leave you, Illa." In his fevered state, he felt cool blue fingers stroking his forehead, heard Lyra's voice singing soft Novan healing chants. Once he opened his eyes to find her sleeping beside his makeshift bed, her hand still holding his. The sight gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. Recovery came slowly. By the time Abel could move without reopening his wounds, spring had arrived. The forest awakened from its winter slumber, new growth pushing through the soil and buds appearing on tree branches. With Alara's help, he ventured outside to sit in the warming sunlight. "Will they come back?" she asked as they watched colorful six-winged insects flit among emerging flowers. "No," Abel replied with certainty. "They believe this territory is cursed now. Novans are superstitious about places where their warriors fall." Alara nodded, accepting his assessment. She leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the months together. "I'm glad you found us," she said simply. "I think you found me," Abel corrected with a small smile. Inside the cabin, Lyra sang softly as she worked, a Novan melody with haunting, beautiful tones. Abel closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. The constant vigilance he'd maintained for years had eased, replaced by something he'd thought forever lost. Peace. That night, after Alara had fallen asleep, Lyra joined Abel by the fire. Her leg had healed completely, though she still walked with a slight limp that might never fully disappear. "The forest will be safe for travel soon," she observed. "The trading paths will open when the mud dries." Abel tensed, understanding her implication. "You are thinking of leaving?" "I'm thinking we have choices now," she corrected gently. "There are Novan settlements to the south that resist the slave trade. They would welcome us." "I see." Abel stared into the flames, an unfamiliar hollowness expanding in his chest. "Or," Lyra continued, her voice softening, "we could stay, if that is what you want." Abel looked up, meeting her silver gaze. "What do you want, Lyra?" She didn't answer immediately, instead reaching out to touch the scar on his side, the wound he'd taken defending them. Her blue fingers traced it with a tenderness that made his breath catch. "For 3 cycles of seasons, I was bound to a mate chosen by my clan," she said finally. "He was a good man, but there was no fire between us. When he begged protecting us, I mourned him as family, not as a lover." Her eyes lifted to Abel's. "With you, I feel both grief and joy more deeply than I believe possible. You awakened something in me that I thought died with my youth." "I've been alone a long time," Abel admitted. "I thought that's what I wanted. I was wrong." Lyra moved closer, her hand rising to cup his face. "Then perhaps we can be wrong together." Their first kiss was hesitant, exploratory, 2 beings from different worlds finding common ground and shared emotion. Their second was not. Spring blossomed into summer, and with it, their relationship grew. Abel expanded the cabin, adding a second room for Alara and reinforcing the walls against the violent storms that swept the region during warm months. Together, they cultivated a garden of native plants with nutritional or medicinal properties. Each evening after the day's work was done, Abel and Lyra would sit together on the bench outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the violet sky with streaks of crimson and gold. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories or plans for their future. Other times they simply existed in comfortable silence, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Alara thrived under their joint care. She grew taller and stronger, equally comfortable with Novan traditions taught by her mother and human skills shared by Abel. She began calling him father in the Novan tongue, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence when he responded with obvious joy. "You taught me to track and hunt," she told him one day as they returned from checking traps. "But mother says you've also taught me something more important." "What's that?" Alara's silver eyes, so like her mother's, regarded him seriously. "That strength isn't just about fighting, it's about protecting what matters." Abel swallowed against a sudden tightness in his throat. "Your mother is very wise." "She says you are too, in your human way." Alara grinned. "She also says you're stubborn." Abel laughed, a sound that had once been foreign to him, but now came easily. "That's fair." One evening as they sat outside watching the moon rise above the forest canopy, Lyra took Abel's hand and placed it on her abdomen. "We will need to expand the cabin again," she said with a smile that contained both nervousness and delight. Abel stared at her in wonder as understanding dawned. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "We're different species." "The universe is more mysterious than either of our peoples understand," Lyra replied. "Some Novan legends speak of unions between our kind and the star travelers who visited generations ago. I never believed them until now." Abel gathered her in his arms, emotion too powerful for words overwhelming him. A child, something he'd never imagined possible in his life as a soldier, let alone as a castaway on an alien world. That night, Lyra taught Abel a Novan bonding ritual. By the light of the fire, they painted symbols on each other's hands with dye made from forest plants, patterns representing protection, unity, and hope. As Abel carefully traced the intricate designs on Lyra's blue skin, she explained their meanings. "This spiral represents life's journey," she said softly, "and these connecting lines show two paths becoming one." "What about this?" Abel asked, pointing to a star-like pattern she'd painted on his palm. "That is the mark of a guardian," Lyra explained, her fingers intertwining with his, merging their painted symbols. "One who protects not just with strength, but with heart." The ceremony concluded with them pressing their painted hands to each other's hearts, leaving mirrored impressions that would fade from skin but remain symbolically permanent. It wasn't a human wedding nor a traditional Novan union, but something unique to them, a bridge between worlds, just as their child would be. Alara was ecstatic at the news, immediately assuming the protective role of older sister. She helped gather special herbs Lyra said would strengthen the growing life, and insisted on feeling for movements long before such sensations were possible. The pregnancy progressed normally, despite its unprecedented nature. As Lyra's abdomen swelled, Abel found himself consumed with both joy and fear. Joy at the miracle they'd created, fear that complications might arise from the mixing of their biologies. Each night, Abel would place his hand gently on Lyra's growing belly, marveling at the occasional flutter of movement beneath his palm. Sometimes he would talk softly to the unborn child, telling stories of Earth and his former life there. Lyra would watch him during these moments with an expression of such tenderness that it still caught him off guard, even now. "What are you thinking?" he asked her once, catching that look. "That you speak of war and loss with such detachment," she replied, covering his hand with hers. "But when you speak to our child, I hear who you truly are." Their peaceful existence was shattered one morning when Abel, returning from checking traps, spotted smoke rising from the direction of their cabin. He dropped his gear and ran, heart pounding with dread. As he crested the final hill, he saw 4 human figures surrounding his home. They wore the rough clothing and carried the weapons of the northern outpost. Slavers. Abel circled through the underbrush, assessing the situation. The cabin door hung open, its bars splintered by force. 2 men stood guard outside while 2 more emerged, dragging Lyra between them. Her face was bruised, and her silver eyes blazed with fury as she struggled despite her advanced pregnancy. Alara was nowhere to be seen. Cold rage filled Abel. These were his people, technically. Humans like him. But they represented everything he'd sought to escape, everything he despised about his own species. They had come to his home and taken his family. He struck without warning. His spear took the first guard through the back, dropping him before he could cry out. The second turned at the sound of his companion falling, only to meet Abel's knife across his throat. Blood sprayed as the man collapsed, gurgling. The remaining two slavers shouted in alarm, one holding Lyra while the other drew a crude pistol, likely traded from a crashed ship's supplies. Abel dove for cover as the weapon discharged, the bullet splintering bark inches from his head. "Another step and she dies," shouted the armed man, pressing his pistol against Lyra's temple. Abel froze, knife in hand, calculating distances and angles. He couldn't reach them before the trigger was pulled. "Let her go," he called. "Your quarrel is with me now." "Traitor to your own kind," spat the slaver. "Breeding with aliens. You're worse than them." Movement in the trees behind the slavers caught Abel's eye, a flash of blue. Ilara had escaped and hidden, just as he'd taught her. Now she crept along a branch directly above the men holding her mother. "Where's the child?" demanded the second slaver, shaking Lyra. "The blue one. She'll fetch twice what this one will, especially with a half-breed in her belly." Abel kept his expression neutral, not wanting to alert them to Ilara's presence. "Gone. I sent her to the Novan settlements days ago." The armed slaver cursed. "You're lying. Search the area," he ordered his companion. As the second man released Lyra to begin searching, Ilara made her move. She dropped from the branch, landing on the armed slaver's shoulders. Her small hands clawed at his eyes, causing him to howl in pain and fire wildly into the air. Abel seized the distraction, charging forward and tackling the second man before he could grab Lyra again. They crashed to the ground, grappling for dominance. The slaver was younger and heavier, but Abel fought with the desperate fury of a man protecting his family. He drove his knife upward, finding the soft spot beneath the slaver's jaw. Meanwhile, Lyra had lurched forward, grabbing a fallen branch. Despite her pregnancy, she swung it with enough force to crack against the skull of the man Ilara was still clinging to. He staggered, dropping his pistol. Abel released the now limp body beneath him and lunged for the weapon, securing it just as the final slaver collapsed, unconscious from Lyra's blow. "Are you hurt?" Abel demanded, examining Lyra's bruised face. "No serious damage," she assured him, though her voice shook. They came without warning. There was no time. Ilara climbed down from the fallen man, her small face tight with anger and fear. "I hid in the roof space like you taught me," she explained to Abel. "They didn't see me." Abel pulled them both into a fierce embrace, relief making his legs weak. "You did perfectly," he told Ilara. "Both of you." That night, after ensuring no other threats lurked nearby, they gathered in the cabin that no longer felt entirely safe. Abel tended to Lyra's bruises while Ilara kept watch at the window, her young face solemn with newfound vigilance. "We can't stay here," Abel said finally. "They'll send more when these don't return." Lyra nodded, one hand resting protectively over her swollen abdomen. "Where will we go?" "South, to those settlements you mentioned, the ones that resist the slave trade. We'll leave at dawn." Later, as Ilara slept, Lyra found Abel outside, standing guard beneath the stars. She joined him silently, her shoulder pressing against his arm in quiet solidarity. "I'm sorry," he said, after a long moment. "I thought I could protect you here." Lyra turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. Even in the dim moonlight, the intensity of her silver eyes was unmistakable. "You did protect us. You are protecting us. But our home is wherever we are together," she interrupted gently. "You taught me that, Abel. Before I met you, home was a place, a settlement, traditions. Now I understand it's something more." She guided his hand to her abdomen, where their child moved beneath his palm. "It's this, us." Abel drew her close, resting his forehead against hers in the gesture that had become their own private ritual of connection. "I love you," he said simply, the words he'd never spoken to anyone before feeling natural and necessary. "And I love you," she replied, "across stars and species and all impossibilities." They set out at dawn, following game trails that would keep them hidden from pursuit. The journey would be challenging, especially with Lyra's pregnancy so advanced, but they had no choice. Abel led the way, spear in hand, every sense alert for danger. 3 days into their journey, in a sheltered valley beside a clear stream, Lyra went into labor. Abel constructed a hasty shelter while Alara gathered the herbs her mother requested. The birth was difficult, hours of labor that left Lyra exhausted and Abel terrified of losing her. When their son finally emerged, squalling his protest at entering the world, his skin shimmered between pale human tones and the faintest blue of his mother's people. His eyes, when they opened days later, were Abel's dark brown rather than Novan silver. Novan children are named for what the parents hope they will become, Lyra explained as she cradled their newborn. What do you hope for him, Abel? Abel gazed at his son, this impossible miracle born of two worlds. I hope he knows peace, he said finally. Real peace, not just the absence of conflict, the kind that comes from belonging. Then we shall call him Pax, Lyra decided. It means peaceful one in your earth tongue, does it not? It does, Abel smiled, touching the infant's delicate fingers. Pax, our bridge between worlds. In the firelight, with Lyra cradling their newborn and Alara leaning against his shoulder, Abel felt a completeness he'd never imagined possible. The universe that had once seemed so hostile had given him an impossible gift. Not just survival, but family, love, purpose. As Lyra hummed a Novan lullaby, her silver eyes meeting his over their son's head, Abel realized that sometimes the greatest journeys aren't measured in light years or distances, but in the space between two hearts, even hearts from different worlds. They remained by the stream for 2 weeks, allowing Lyra to regain her strength and the infant to grow sturdy enough for travel. During this time, Abel carved a small pendant from wood, working on it each night while the others slept. He shaped it into a spiral surrounded by protective symbols, a combination of Novan patterns Lyra had taught him and designs from Earth he still remembered. When it was finished, he presented it to her, threaded on a cord of woven fibers. On Earth, we sometimes exchange tokens to symbolize our bond, he explained as he placed it around her neck. Lyra touched the pendant, her expression soft with wonder. It's beautiful. It's both our worlds together, Abel said, like us. She drew him close and kissed him tenderly, their son cradled between them. Like us, she agreed. Their journey resumed, taking them through increasingly unfamiliar territory. Abel remained vigilant, or fenin, aware that danger could come from any direction. Human slavers, hostile Novans, or the planet's numerous predators. They traveled primarily at night when the heat was less oppressive and visibility worked in their favor, Abel's human eyes being better adapted to darkness than most native species. One night, as they crested a ridge, they saw lights in the valley below, the glow of fires from what appeared to be a substantial settlement. Novan or human, they couldn't tell from this distance. We'll circle around, Abel decided, unwilling to risk an unknown encounter. Before they could retreat, however, a voice called from the darkness behind them. Stop where you are! Abel whirled, pushing Lyra and the children behind him. His spear came up instinctively as 5 figures emerged from the shadows. Novans, armed with bows and spears. We mean no harm, Abel said in the Novan tongue. We're traveling south. The leader of the group, a female with elaborate markings on her blue skin, stepped forward. Her silver eyes widened as she took in the unusual family. A human male, a Novan female, a Novan child, and an infant clearly of mixed heritage. What are you? She asked, not unkindly. Survivors, Lyra answered, moving to stand beside Abel. My mate and our children. We seek refuge from those who would enslave us. The leader studied them silently, then gestured to the valley below. That is sanctuary. We accept all who reject the trading of lives, Novan and human alike. You would be the first mated pair of both, however. There are humans there? Abel asked, surprised. Those who refuse to participate in the slave trade. Deserters from the northern outposts. Engineers and scientists who believe our peoples can share knowledge rather than conquer. She lowered her weapon. If that is what you seek, you are welcome among us. Abel looked at Lyra, who nodded slightly. He thought of the crystal cave with its ancient markings showing different species living in harmony. Perhaps that wasn't just history or legend, but prophecy. We seek a home, he said simply, a place where our children can grow without fear. The Novan leader's expression softened as her gaze fell on Pax, sleeping peacefully in his carrier. Then you have found it, she said. Come, dawn approaches, and you have traveled far. As they descended toward the settlement, Alara slipped her hand into Abel's. "Are we home now, Father?" Abel looked at his extraordinary family, a blue-skinned woman whose courage and compassion had healed his broken spirit, a brave girl who had shown him purpose with a simple plea for help, and a newborn son who represented hope beyond all reasonable expectation. "Yes, Ela," he said, squeezing her hand. "We're home." Lyra's free hand found his, their fingers intertwining, blue and pale, different yet perfectly matched. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Abel felt the last of his old defenses fall away. The soldier had finally found peace, not in isolation, but in the most unlikely of families on the most unlikely of worlds.